agenda. Any changes or any modifications to the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
So moved by Forsberg,
Second.
second by Wheaton. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. On to future events. Please check the district website for a complete list of monthly events. Monday, October 12th through Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, no school, staff personal work days. Thursday, October 15th, 2020, no school. Friday, October 16th, 2020, no school, and the district service center is closed. Tuesday, October 27th, 2020, school board work session at 6 p.m. And Tuesday, November 10th, 2020, regular school board meeting at 7 p.m. with communication to the board at 6:45. So we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Wheaton.
Second.
Second by Strobel. To approve the following items of the consent agenda. Minutes of the August 10th, 2020 school board work session. Minutes of the September 15th, 2020 school board regular meeting. Minutes of the September 29th, 2020 school board work session. Bills paid for August 2020 in the following amounts: $1,539,995, and personal items. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. I think I forgot to say the motion passed on the agenda approval also. Knew I'd catch it. Get messed up somewhere. Okay, we'll move on to discussions, reports, and information items. First, engaged and enthusiastic learners align work of adults in continuous improvement personalization instruction and responsiveness to meet our students' unique and varied needs. We have K-6 English language, arts curriculum, the study update with Dr. Hope Braun, Ms. Judy Calhoun, and Ms. Judy, I don't want to mess the name up. Buren?
Yeah, good.
All right. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am just going to connect here so we can follow along on the screen. All right, there we go. So, good evening. We wanted to take some time tonight to provide an update to the board and community on where we are at with our work in the curriculum review process for kindergarten through 6th grade reading. And as you are all aware as a board, our kindergarten through 6th grade teachers engaged in year-long professional learning last year, focused on the science of teaching reading, and we ended the school year with a team, engaging a team in reviewing some new core reading resources. And last week at our work session, we spent about an hour and a half providing an update, and we thought we'd share that again with you tonight. Maybe not the full hour and a half, but we'll definitely make sure everyone is up to speed on where we're at in the process. Just again, so our community members and families who might be listening or watching have that information as well. We have a few more folks with us tonight. I'm going to get to introductions in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to ground us in our curriculum continuous improvement cycle. And that's on the screen here on the slides. And we have 3 primary components in our curriculum improvement cycle. And as I go through each component, I'll also provide the context specific to K-6 reading so that everyone is aware of the past work we've done and where we are at within the process. So if we start on the upper left, our first phase is to research evidence-based practices and study current practices. So clearly we have always taught reading here in Spring Lake Park, and we've always had a theory of action around our instructional approach and our strategies for the teaching of reading. And so this part of the curriculum continuous improvement cycle asks that we continue to hold that theory of action up to the latest research, the latest evidence-based practices, and that's what we do to make sure that that theory of action remains solid. And we do that consistently in the area of reading, and certainly as we engage in a formal review cycle. And so most recently, as we shared last year when we gave you an update on the professional learning, we've worked with EAB, which is a reminder, is a national organization focused on synthesizing those evidence-based practices in K-12 education, okay, to review our theory of action, to make sure we continue to be aligned to the science of teaching reading. We also have examined it through the work of the National Reading Panel, the District Management Group, and continual review of literature from national literacy experts. So that is ongoing, and we explicitly did it real thoroughly again last year and brought our teachers along on that learning in that year-long professional learning. Second phase is to develop the intended curriculum. And in this second component of the continuous improvement cycle, has us reviewing our intended curriculum, or what we describe as what it is we want kids to know and be able to do, in this case, in the area of English language arts, which is inclusive of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So the second part of that phase is to look at what we want kids to know and be able to do, and the second part is to provide recommendations for resources to support kids learning that intended curriculum. So just a quick update on where we stand with the English language arts for elementary. As you know, we had a team of 30+ teachers work in an innovation cohort during the 2019-20 school year to develop our academic and life skill competencies. This provided an opportunity for us to review all of our learning outcomes for English language arts and all the core content areas, but tonight we're speaking to English language arts through the lens of competency-based learning. And with that, develop academic competencies for our K-12 English language arts. And a quick reminder, our competency-based learning framework includes not only the academic competencies themselves, but also what we refer to as those essential questions and big ideas that are so important for kids to see connections to the world beyond the four walls, or the learning spaces, maybe not four walls anymore, of our classrooms. Those questions that we want kids to engage with as they do their learning. And so all of those pieces of our intended curriculum are crosswalked to all of the state standards for English language arts. So you'll see those all come to life. All right. So the second part, the recommendation for resources to help students meet the competencies, that is what we are going to spend the rest of our time on tonight. And so with that, I am going to change slides and introduce the people sitting around me. So I get to take a break, thankfully. And I've asked the two facilitators of the process for our curricular design team, Judy Cahoon, principal at North Point, Amy Bierlin, our district literacy coordinator, who led the facilitation of the group. I'm going to have them do some of the sharing tonight. And then very gratefully, we asked two of our teachers who were on the curricular design team to join us if it worked out in their schedules. And so Lisa Comstock, an academic specialist from North Point Elementary, and Sarah Cahoon, a first grade teacher at Park Terrace Elementary, both were on the curricular design team, and we're a part of everything we talked about last week and everything we're going to review tonight. And so what we're going to do is share some of those highlights of the team's work, and then interspersed in there, we're going to ask our both Lisa and Sarah to jump in and just give you their perspective of their experience in the process. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Judy.
Hello again, everybody. Nice to see you all. Just a little bit of a review from some of the things that we shared with you last week. We wanted to again highlight our team. We really enjoyed working with our team of teacher leaders from across the district. They brought great experience in teaching in K-6, in serving as academic specialists, serving our gifted and talented students, English language learners. We had a wide variety of expertise represented on this group. And just to go through and highlight who those specific teachers were, Centerview had 2 teachers, Tracy Lytle and Judy Offerdahl. At North Point, we had 2 teachers, Katrina McCarthy and Lisa Comstock. Lisa's here with us tonight, and she also serves as an academic specialist. Park Terrace had 2 teachers, Sarah Cahoon and Tricia Wynn, both classroom teachers. From Woodcrest Spanish Immersion, we had Jessie Gobauer and Katie Ayu. We had from Westwood 3 teachers, Rupal Dave, Alyssa Olson, and Callista Alden. Callista as well served as an academic specialist. Our district-wide EL lead, Christy Dietz, was on the group with us. Our special ed group was represented by Jackie Lawson. And then we had 2 district-level coordinators. Geraldine Nemenich is our learning and technology coordinator, and Lindsay Johnson is an innovative and personalized learning coordinator in our district. So it was a great group of folks to work with, and we really put our nose to the grindstone and had a lot of fun learning and talking, reading, and making some recommendations along the way. And we spent a lot of time together virtually. As we shared last week, we did this work for the vast majority of the time we were using WebEx. And we started our work in April and May just to ground us a little bit, to give us that background knowledge that would be necessary for us to make this recommendation. We spent another week together in June and a week together in July. And good thing we all liked each other, because we spent about 1,500 hours together in this work. So it was a big effort. So as typical, and we know how important it is to call upon our Spring Lake Park 3D design process, we spent a lot of time in that discovery zone of our design framework. And we looked in at our practices and information regarding Spring Lake Park schools. We looked out at the experts in the field in the science of reading, and we looked around at metro districts. And so just some highlights of looking in. We reviewed very carefully, once again, our reading framework. We wanted to take a closer look at our theory of action to make sure that we understood it, that it was aligned with some of the learning we did around the teaching of reading. And as a result, we made just a few revisions, not so much in our practices. We found that they were aligned, but in clarifying our language to make it a little more user-friendly around our theory of action. We spent quite a bit of time reviewing data from across the district, collecting data from our teachers, asking them about their sense of efficacy as teachers of reading. This was a research-based survey given to all K through 5 teachers of reading. We looked at student achievement data over time. We disaggregated it in a variety of ways. We have done walkthroughs over the past school year in which we looked a lot at teacher practices, and we looked at that data as well so that we could really see what our implementation of our reading theory was. We spent additional time in getting our group up to speed on competency-based learning. We knew we wanted to ground our survey of resources in competency-based learning. And as a result of all of this looking in at our district, we were able to affirm that we have a strong theory of action, that our practices are aligned to the science of teaching reading, but our theory in action is jagged. We have some things that we want to celebrate and some things we know needs continued attention, and our student data reflects this. It was jagged as well. As we looked out, looking in first, then we looked out, and we really, again, reviewed that science of the teaching of reading. Hope had mentioned some of the resources that we called upon for this look. It was started with an extensive study of recommendations from AEB and thinking about how that aligned to our theory of action. Along with AEB, which is that education research group, we looked at the National Reading Panel. We considered the work of national and international experts in the field, and we called upon the district management group to support our work. And our overall finding as we looked out was that this review of the science of teaching reading confirmed our alignment and our theory of action with best practices in the teaching of reading. One of the last things we did in that discovery phase is we looked around at metro districts. We said we wanted to know what's the word on the street, what's happening around us, what are some of the thoughts and perspectives and theories of action around us. And so we looked at our metro neighbors, we looked further out in the state of Minnesota and around the country. And what we learned from that informal yet very prescribed study was that there was no one curricular resource that others were using that stood out for its strengths in alignment to the science of reading. When we talked with teachers in other districts, they often evaluated the reading resources as something they personally preferred or that they felt comfortable in using. And what we found was that this was actually also evidence that the EAB group had gathered, that their research indicates that core reading resources are often chosen based upon a good sales rep. What's the vendor going to tell you? What might be some hot buttons right in that particular moment? And so we were able to call on our neighboring districts to learn about their materials, but it did not, we didn't find any specific information that supported us in the area of the science of teaching and reading. So that is a little bit about that design, or that discover phase of our 3D design process, and we just wanted to open it up now to Lisa and Sarah to speak if anything was exceptionally meaningful to you as we went through the process of our work together and as we did that discover work. So I'll turn it over to you two ladies.
All right, well, thank you. I think, first of all, just being part of a group that was guided through a thoughtful, purposeful, kind of a journey, for lack of better words. But one of the things I appreciated early on, as Judy was speaking, she was mentioning the variety of people that came to the table. And one of the things that they brought out early on was the biases we bring to the table as well, those confirmation biases we're looking for, and that's definitely how I was jumping into this, was looking for those resources that serve the kids I serve the best. But having contact with a wide variety of people throughout the district, and actually this is where technology kind of made it really neat, because in the breakout rooms and things that were designed for us, we got to speak with a wide variety of people. We didn't kind of tend to stick to our own and kind of air those biases. So when we got to looking, that we were much more transparent in the process. One of the pieces I really was so thrilled about was to go out and ask other people, because I thought I was going to bring back some magic bullet, like I was going to talk to somebody who was so inspired. And as Judy said, there wasn't that moment. I didn't get that from anybody, any of my trusted colleagues out in the educational world. More was the nuances, the changes they made, the pros and cons. So I guess I'll wait and talk about it more later, but that's what led me to be more excited about the resource that was chosen.
And to jump in on what Lisa was saying, I also really appreciated being on a team with a variety of people from around the district who, like she mentioned, work with students with a lot of different backgrounds and abilities. So having those perspectives on the team, I think, was really beneficial. And I also really was thankful that we went through all of the learning on confirmation bias and competency-based learning before we were able to see the curriculums, just so we really knew what we were looking for and wanted to make sure it aligns with that. I really appreciated digging deep into our reading framework and comparison with the science of teaching reading, and we saw that it really did align very well with that. And so all of the professional development that I received last year on the science of teaching reading, it was really evident that our framework does align with that. And then that also was something we talked about with the EAB. And I teach first grade, so it's a very foundational heavy year. So I really appreciated how explicit some of the foundational instruction is going to be with some of our new resources, hopefully. So. But.
Thank you. And I just want to point out for the board and people listening, both Lisa and Sarah referenced something we talked about, so learning they had around confirmation bias. And all that is, just to make sure everyone is aware of what we mean when we say that, is oftentimes our frame will be to seek information that already confirms something we believe or hold near and dear to us. And that's just a natural human phenomenon, right? And so what the learning that happened in that area of confirmation bias was just really having people make explicit like their awareness of, why am I thinking this? And why is this, why am I finding a lot of alignment with this? So it just really is bringing that to the surface and intentionally kind of pausing and interrupting that to make sure that we're really looking at resources not against what my personal preference is, but what the science of teaching reading is and the other rubrics that we used for that. All right, that's back to Amy.
All right, so kind of while we were looking with the team, looking in, looking out, looking around, Judy and I were also considering possible resources that we would then bring forth to the team to take a look at, to review. And a really important part of our role is to really dig into the research, and it's also part of our passion, and it's fun for us. But we need to stay up on the current research and practices of reading. So we take a look at a lot of research through articles, journals, podcasts, anything we can get our hands on, gathered through who we know about the thought leaders in the area of reading and literacy. That kind of study of research led us to compile a list of 7 possible reading resources that we wanted to take a closer look at. We accessed EdReports, which is a recognized independent organization designed to improve education by providing reviews of K-12 instructional materials. We wanted to look to them to see what resources they might have reviewed that we hadn't yet found, and then also to see which of the resources meet their expectations for high-quality resources. They review them for the text quality, the knowledge building, and usability. As a result of that, we were then narrowing that list further so that Judy and I screened 5 resources utilizing identified evaluation tools. We used 3 tools as we were doing this screener. One was the Regional Educational Laboratory, called REL, rubric for evaluating reading and language arts instructional materials. That tool looks specifically at specific areas in language arts. So one area it looked at was the reading foundational skills. It looks at, for K2, it looks at print concepts, looks at phonological awareness, and then looks at phonemic awareness specifically, and then phonics instruction. K5, it looks at fluency, oral reading fluency, and then at grades 3 through 5, there's a whole section on word analysis. And each one of those sections has an extensive list of checklists that also goes with it. The second area that it looks at is reading comprehension for both literary and informational text. Then it looks at writing development and skill, at speaking and listening development and skill, and at language development and skill. So it looks at also the grammar and the usage parts of that. The second tool that we used in our study was a competency-based learning screening checklist. That really helped us look to see, does it provide learning experiences that will lead to the level of competency? Do the experience require various levels of depth of knowledge? Are there relevant interdisciplinary experiences? Do students understand the big why of the learning? Does it provide a balanced approach to assessment? And does it allow students to demonstrate their learning at the level of competency through authentic performance assessments? The third tool that we looked at was the Curriculum and Instruction Continuum for Cultural Proficiency. So we looked for some look-fors there. Does it provide regular opportunities for students to contribute their knowledge, their abilities, and their perspectives? Does the instruction and experiences incorporate inquiry and higher order thinking skills? Does it provide opportunities for students to personalize their connections and share their multiple perspectives? This has got relevant content. and differentiated instructional approaches and resources meet student needs. So when we looked at these 3 resources, we looked at these 5 resources, we found 3 that aligned to the science of teaching reading.
Yeah, and then step 4, thanks, Dave. We at that point, when we were down to that 3, we did an initial cost comparison at that point, because that's a factor that we have to think about when we're choosing a resource. And so we took just a very initial high-level look at the components within the resource itself and the costs associated with that. So some things we looked at there is when you look at a comprehensive reading resource, sometimes they have an anthology, right, which is like a big book that has a lot of little excerpts or small pieces of stories built into there, right? That's similar to our past resource. Or do they provide actual picture books and novels and informational text that are separate materials? So that's one thing. What is the technology that's associated with it? What cost was there to that through the 3 different? What are the teacher resources? What opportunities do the teachers have to link beyond the resource into looking at some supplemental resources, and what's the cost associated with that? And then when we look at comprehensive reading resources, often you'll find decodable texts, which are shorter. You guys as primary teachers know this, like right, shorter kids' books that are really focused on the phonics skills that we're working on, so that as students are practicing those foundational skills, they're not doing it in isolation. They're seeing the meaning and purpose of mastering those skills, because then they can read a book with that, right? So that's what we mean by that. So that was a cost aspect that we looked at. And then finally, in a comprehensive reading resource, we look at what are other manipulatives that are offered to provide different hands-on learning opportunities for students in that. And so right when we looked at the 3 that these 2 had narrowed it down to, initially we just did this high-level look at what are all those components, and then what are the various costs associated with it. And based on that initial cost comparison for all 3 of the narrowed down resources, the overall costs was really relatively comparable. The components within it varied. Like one had an anthology, one had more text, like different texts in front, but when you added all of those various components up for each of the 3, the costs were really relatively comparable. So that's where we ended that very first initial screening.
So then after that initial screening process of the guide down to 3, one of those resources stood out as being aligned not only to the science of teaching reading, but also aligned to the competency-based learning and the equitable practices. This resource is comprised of 2 publishers who have partnered to provide deep, rich learning experiences for students, both in the explicit systematic practices for the reading foundational skills of phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. That's Wilson Foundations. And in building comprehension and vocabulary, and also deep knowledge using those interdisciplinary units and complex text is Great Minds, Wit, and Wisdom. This really comes together as one strong resource. So as a result of that initial review of Wit and Wisdom and Foundations, that's the resource that our team of teachers started with in their resource review process. Over the course of a total of 5 days, we had our teams working together. We had teams of at least 2 per grade level who reviewed all of the units at the grade level, evaluating the teacher materials and the summaries of the student texts for the pieces. They read each of those units, evaluating and taking notes using the 3 tools that Judy and I had also used: the Regional Educational Laboratory rubric for evaluating reading and language arts instructional materials, the Curriculum and Instruction Continuum for cultural proficiency, and the competency-based learning screening checklist. Throughout that process, like I think Lisa referenced, we had those breakout rooms going, so we had people coming together for dialogue at the same grade level, and then also vertically across grade levels, so that we could have the important conversations along the way about what we were finding as they were reviewing the resource. So this is going to be a great chance again to hear from Lisa and Sarah and really have them speak to their experiences reviewing those resources, pieces of that process, the dialogue they had with other teachers, and some of the opportunities that they might see for teachers and students moving forward.
Right. I got the process. I was, again, very thankful to be a part of it, and it was really helpful, like I said earlier, to get that kind of background knowledge on how we were going to evaluate the different curriculum resources, and then just thinking about it through the different lenses. So I feel like while reviewing, I really did look through it for like the cultural proficiency lens. I want to ensure that I'm providing material that's equitable to all my students, and the first unit that I evaluated, I was so excited about. I was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be texting my team right now, but like I'm so excited about this. And it just really showed a lot of diverse text. It allowed students to engage in or opportunities to learn from multiple perspectives and kind of evaluate that and form their own perspectives. And it also just really was a chance for my students to see themselves in the books they're reading. And I also love how it was very cross-curricular. There's a lot of great writing responses that really aligned with what we were reading about. And then it also brought in a lot of great social studies and science skills, just based on the types of texts we were reading and how we were evaluating them. And then in the foundations, I love teaching phonics. It's my favorite thing to do, and I just loved it. I was excited to use it. I think it's so explicit, and it's really ensuring that we're not going to leave students with those holes missing, and that might affect them in later years. So it's really aligned as well with the science of teaching reading and the recommendations that the EEB shared with us on the importance of teaching those foundational skills, and then it's really in a sequential order that makes sense, and yeah, I'm excited.
I too really enjoyed having an afternoon just to dig into the resource with a partner and having the accountability of that conversation plus the rubrics we'd be using alongside of it for those look-fors. And it was interesting because as I dove into it, I was really looking at it through a teacher's perspective, maybe a little self-centered. But whenever you get something new, it's a little overwhelming. But soon I grew to find out that the language was common, the routines were common. The kids would carry this with them and hear this similar usage of words as they pertain to the routines that are embedded. I got really excited, like Sarah said, about the integration of different subjects, especially art. I feel like with that integration of art, it gives a lot of access points. You maybe hear us throughout the district talk about low floor, high ceiling, but lots of kids can come into that conversation around art. And that got me really excited thinking about our art teacher and how she might grow into that and expand that. So I was very thankful for that. So walking away feeling really good about wisdom again, wanting to kind of share it with everybody I spoke to. And then foundations. Foundations was that one component that I did keep hearing when we talk about looking out. From trusted colleagues, people talking about this phonics program that was fantastic. So I started watching YouTube videos on how they teach it and started embedding some of their practices into what I do. Not with the same resources, but knowing that these were things that were working for kids. So I'm excited about it.
Awesome. And with that, I'm going to let you guys reveal the team recommendation.
Well, I think one of the most exciting things as we think about these screens in the time of distance and all the pictures and looking and seeing everybody give that firm thumbs up when asked if we would recommend the resource, that was a moment of joy for sure.
Yeah. So unanimously, the team does recommend the Wit and Wisdom and the Foundations as the core resource.
Yeah, and really, between these four, they've already gone through this rationale, but I will take a minute just to be clear around the why of that recommendation. That came from the team themselves, and actually you heard both Sarah and Lisa speak to that specific explicit instruction for phonemic awareness and phonics. You heard them speak about those domains of language arts, the reading, writing, listening, speaking integrated seamlessly, and then beyond that, the interdisciplinary opportunities that it provides with all of the other subject areas. How it uses backwards design for units and lessons, that's something that I heard from teachers through the process, and actually these two just in our casual conversation tonight reinforced that. It was, Sarah, maybe you said, and it just like, you start with this essential question and big idea, and it just helps design all the way down then to what the kids are going to work on day to day. It definitely has opportunities for kids to engage at all levels of depth of knowledge. And again, our competencies work toward those higher depths of knowledge 3 and 4. And it's really important that our kids have experiences at each of those levels of depth of knowledge to build the foundational skills to allow them to apply that and transfer their learning to other settings. Provides multiple perspectives and strong connections to students in the world around them. That's something that we heard Sarah talk about that stood out specifically as she was looking at that. Clear teacher guidance. We didn't really practice this. Lisa mentioned that in her comments. And then again, I shared just a couple slides ago that we did that initial cost comparison. So then when we got to this level of this one with the team recommendation, Amy and I sat down, and Amy's just done a ton of work with looking at the cost comparison and the resources, and looking at that comprehensive approach to make sure that it still falls within the guidelines and the capacity of our curricular budget. So I appreciate all of that work. We've engaged in a lot of conversations around that as well. So that's the recommendation. When at the work session, we showed you as a board, like we scrolled through about 40 pages of a couple different modules so you could kind of experience that. Well, we didn't want to spend that length of time going through 40 pages for a couple modules. We did actually just want to be sure to reinforce that with you as a board and then with our community who might be watching or listening. Just a couple of real life examples here. And so we pulled on the slides the similar units or modules we talked with you about, and then actually Sarah and Lisa looked at different grade levels. So they're just going to give a couple comments from there. But Judy, if you want to just give a quick overview for the kindergarten module.
Yes, for sure. To circle back to the kindergarten example, that first module is around the 5 senses, and as you know, has been brought up throughout our presentation tonight, that those ideas of those competencies, those things that will take us through life that cross different curriculum areas. The essential question kind of is that overarching umbrella for that, and in this particular unit, that is how do our 5 senses help us learn. And then within that, there are big ideas that we will keep to build upon. And if you would look at those in greater detail, you'll see that some are related to the 5 senses, some are related to reading, and so they'll take those through life to help them. I think if you looked at those from the lens of any student at any grade level, we would see how they will still be relevant. We highlighted the texts and the resources in the curriculum of wit and wisdom, and as you can see in the illustration here, there's authors that are very highly respected, Aliki, there's titles that are tried and true, beloved, such as Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. They also call upon different mediums to teach through, to introduce the children to. And in this case, there's articles, there's paintings, and there's videos. Pablo Picasso's work is shared in this particular module. And there's also a child artist whose work is also referenced and used as part of the discussion. Examples of assessments that are used along the way, post-Socratic seminars where the kids really are going to be talking to one another, drawing from text, drawing from life experiences, thinking at those high levels, weaving in some of those upper DOK types of questions and experiences. The formative assessments that are referenced will really help teachers personalize the instruction to meet the needs of the individual children. And then the end of the module assessment is a performance task where the children will be creating something versus sort of like regurgitating something, so to speak. So I think that was one of the things that our team was really excited about, is the really authentic assessments that are called upon.
There's a lot of exciting units to choose from, but another one we want to share is the grade 4 example. It's module 1. The question the students explore throughout this entire unit leads them to, what does it mean to have a great heart, literally and figuratively? And it really provides an opportunity for some of those higher depths of knowledge, thinking by contrasting and synthesizing information and learning both around informational texts, around the science of the actual heart, and the literature around the concepts of just courage and bravery, and that idea of a good heart that way. And not only are they learning it across the disciplines, like we've referenced several units that cross disciplines in the grade level, so this isn't just helping them in grade 4 to cross disciplines, but it's really starting to build a lot of knowledge for students so that they can be successful then as they get into the life sciences in grade 7. So it's leading right up to the targets for them and the learning as they progress through grades. Judy shared a kindergarten example, I shared a 4th grade example. We know Sarah teaches 1st grade, and as a part of the review, Lisa took a look at 3rd grade. So we're going to have them share a few things that they just jumped out at them and they're excited about as they're thinking about the upcoming units.
All right. When I think about the way this is laid out, I think about depth and breadth. It goes so deep. It's not a 1 week and done, not a pre-assessment, not post-assessment, and now let's move on. But it really brings in so much connectedness. I think we've talked so much about that interdisciplinary, but the time, and as we've casually met before, we talked about our greatest hope would be that these kids would feel really inspired and challenged. And I think our kids love to be challenged, and they love to think deeply, and that they would bring these conversations home to the dinner table, things that they're thinking about, things that they've been inspired by. And that's really what popped out. The unit I really took a liking to is outer space, and I haven't met a kid yet who hasn't been excited to learn about space, but just how deep they go, and having those video clips and complementing it with the art. I just think we'll have learners who are excited to be there and engaged in what they're doing.
Yeah, I looked at the 1st grade unit. It would be the first unit that we start off the year with, and it's called The World of Books. The essential question for that unit was, how do books change lives around the world? So it was really cool. It showed how kids access books around the world in different ways. Like some kids here might go to a library, but it showed moving libraries where, I think it was like a mule, but a mule carries books from like city to city or country to country in order to provide reading material. And then it talks just really about like, what do we get from books? We get adventures, we learn things, we are able to apply new things from reading. And I just think the kids would be so excited. They know how we do things here, but learning about the ways people from around the different worlds do things, we really will get them an opportunity to think about those different perspectives and evaluate them. And then this one also did include a lot of music from around the world and art. And so I think even for our friends who are not quite ready to read the text, but they can still really engage with it in a high level way. And gathering all that background knowledge will really help them to be successful. I also forgot in my earlier one, like it really hits on the writing craft, but also the speaker's craft and listening craft. So it embeds so many opportunities to explicitly teach the students how to have that Socratic seminar and then to practice it. It talks about how we can show that we're like a good listener when our friend is sharing their ideas, and then how we can really compare and contrast our ideas with each other. So not only are they viewing multiple perspectives in the text, they're also able to provide their own perspectives and learn about their peers' perspectives as well.
Thank you. The final slide that we have tonight just goes through the timeline, and we actually have just shared much of it with you, so we won't revisit that, but I just wanted to acknowledge, we did consider implementing the resource at the start of the school year. we talked with the board a little bit about that, and we surveyed our teachers of reading at K-6 to get their thoughts on that implementation timeline. Through the survey, what we did learn is that all of our teachers are very excited to receive and start using new resources for reading instruction. And we also learned that it would be really important, given the unique start to the school year, to get that launched successfully before we bring this in. So here we are now in October, provided update to you last week and this week, and we just put in the materials order and are in the midst of scheduling professional learning around the resources, which is likely going to take place in November, and we're working on it real time. And we'll start implementation then as we move into try to. And just before we wrap up, a question that we were asked last week that I thought was a really great question was what will families experience? Will they experience anything differently as we shift and transition to a new resource? And so I actually asked Lisa and Sarah if they would just share a little bit. You got my perspective on that last week, but I would like you guys to share maybe a little bit about what you think about that.
I don't think they'll see a lot of physical things coming home, but I hope, my greatest hope is it's that conversation that I can't wait to tell you about, or you have to see what we learned about today, or look at my art project and that matches what we're doing. So as I think about this and what families might feel differently about, I hope that it's that, these little people coming home inspired and excited.
And to go off of that, I kind of hope my students experience what I felt viewing this resource as they are learning from it. Like, I was just so excited, I wanted to get started right away. So I just hope that they're feeling that engaged and excited while they're going through it. And then, as Lisa said, just coming home excited to talk about it. I know I had dinner at my mom's one of the days after reading it, and that's all I could talk about. I was like, I want my kids to go home and feel that way. So, yeah, and I think it'll also allow them to engage in their essential understandings outside of just the text. Like, I think that'll give opportunity for parents to see that, yep, this is a question or understanding that we had at school, but this is how they're applying it in their daily lives and how they're able to talk about it or ask questions, and just having more of that deeper understanding of why we're readers and just being excited about the things they're doing.
Thanks. And then just adding to that, I know you heard this last week from me, but for anyone who might be listening or watching, the other piece that you've seen that's embedded so much into this is so much more writing, and using writing as an authentic way to assess. And so even as you saw the end of module assessments, like, kids will be becoming home authors of their own books, and getting the feedback on that along the way. So with that, we'll wrap it up and I guess ask for questions, or I think Tony, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. We'll open it up to the board for questions. Well,
Two things. Since there's apparently quite a bit of writing involved, does this also include spelling?
Yeah, so a big, in the foundations, it has the decoding pieces, besides the phonemic ordinance and those. It has the teach explicit decoding of how to decode the written word, but then also the encoding, so the spelling piece is right along with it. The approach to it is similar to our word study, where it's not like a set list every week. It's really learning the patterns of the decoding and the encoding right in the units, so they're assessed on their learning of the phonics pieces. It's not like a traditional spelling test where you have a word list. It's really about being able to learn the phonic, the syllabication rule, the phonics patterns, and then being able to apply and transfer that into any word that has that pattern. So, yes.
The second question has to do with state standards and how this all fits together.
Sure. So when we went through the module last week, we showed all of the corresponding standards. And so what we do in our unit design frameworks that would be based on the modules is we align with what are our academic competencies for language arts. And then with that, then what are the big ideas and essential questions, which Wisdom has built in. We're able to tailor that, right, to align. And then we go into what are the knowledge and skills that are part of that learning. So when we backwards design a unit, it's all of those pieces before we even get to any other pieces. Like we want to make sure that's that intended curriculum. What do we want kids to know and be able to do? From that big competency down to all those little narrow pieces of knowledge and skills that are all important to the learning process. And so within that, we have what we call crosswalked all of the state standards for English language arts within reading, writing, speaking, and listening into those academic competencies. It might be attached to the big ideas or essential questions. It might be attached to the knowledge and skills. And so those will be reflected through each of the units or modules and units that we have. That's how those come into play there.
Any other questions?
Did this review and recommendation process that you went through, did that involve any input by parents or parent groups like SIAC or something?
Yeah, so typically we would bring this to SIAC as part of our process. Because this happened where we all were staying at home, we didn't have the opportunity to bring it to them in person. We were able to connect with parents in conversations, but we didn't have a formal in-person SIAC meeting that we would normally have for that. Yes.
So normally this would go through SIAC, the curriculum change, but just because of the pandemic, it wasn't able to happen
Absolutely.
in a
Yeah.
normal way.
Yes. Yep. So we had to rely on other hows for that.
Other questions?
I have a question, I just wanted to know. So, you had that chance last week to hear from Judy and Amy and Hope, tonight from Lisa and Sarah, and they represent a whole bunch of other teachers, put in tons of time in a very unique environment to do this work, and that took a different kind of commitment. And it's not just the time they put in, but now the leadership they brought. They're bringing back with their staff to be able to kind of breathe that enthusiasm that we have on their staff to be able to implement these resources as well. And their leadership moving forward is going to be so important too, and supporting the people as we move forward. So thank you to both of you for being here tonight, but more importantly, for all the time you've invested, and pass that along to everybody else in the group. And of course, always appreciate the three of you for the work that you do each day. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I can't imagine how excited you are for a new curriculum to come in that, I mean, if you're excited about it, I mean, I can imagine how excited the students will be to get something new and fresh. I just had one quick question regarding the curriculum. Do they provide, because I thought about this after last time we talked, do they provide any updates to the curriculum after, like periodic updates to what we purchased?
Yeah, so they've already, think about where they were last beginning of March to where they are now, have updated a lot of things in their resources, both of the people that we're working with there. So I'm sure they go through that process regularly and make those updates and make us aware of that, but they have changed a lot of pieces and availability and even just what you can access since February. So those are some of the updates that we know are there, and I would expect more coming along the way. So, I mean, there hasn't been any since we've looked at it, but they've done a lot since February, then by August, they had a whole bunch of new stuff out, so I imagine that they'll continue to keep those updates coming.
Great. I'm excited for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll move on to effective operations, ensure effective management of human, financial, and fiscal resources. Enrollment update from Ms. Amy Schultz.
Good evening. Every October we give the board board an update about where we sit with our enrollment for the start of the school year, kind of talk about where that sits compared to where we were last year, our budget, where we expect it to land at the end of the year. So we'll go through that quick. So let's see. So with that, we'll start with the elementary. So on this one, you can see if you skip to the bottom right, which I think is an accountant thing to do because that's usually what the totals are. But overall, the bottom right is we are down 2% from projections. So when we talk about the projections, that's what the board approved in June as a part of the budget. So with that, you can see this one goes across by school. So you can see the total by each school, what was projected at each school, and then down by grade level, also compared to projections by grade level. K-4, we are down just a little bit at, for third grade, one kid, 22 at second grade. That could be a result of that being the first grade level, that we aren't in school each day. I mean, it's unusual for us to see a drop K-4 at each grade level. Typically, we might see one that goes down and the rest of them would all go up. Not usually more than 5 to 10 kids either way. It's a very consistent, usually growth within those. So this one is off a little bit. Centerview is higher and Park Terrace is lower than projected, both because of their kindergarten enrollments at each site. Lighthouse is up three students, but it does make that percentage off to the side look really big when you're talking 3 out of 13 kids. So that's the elementary level. At the secondary level, so right now we have 5th and 6th grade at the secondary because they're at Westwood. But with that, you can see that same elementary trend continued for 5th and 6th grade here. Then starting in 7th grade, we actually see a little bit of up and down across the rest of the grade levels. 12th grade is actually currently higher than projected, and that is a little unusual. Although we do project for a decrease at 12th grade. And our October 1st count is our highest count of the year as a district, although that is something that is very common among all schools to see a decrease at the 11th and 12th grade level. And that's usually where at 11th and 12th grade you might see students that have started to attend Metro Heights, as well as start enrolling in more post-secondary enrollment option classes at local colleges. But then in addition to that, at the 12th grade level, we usually also see early graduates. So that also, while the student starts with us, doesn't finish the year, so it doesn't result in that full average daily membership for those students. So that's something that we would typically see at those grade levels. And since what you're looking at right now is the October 1st count in each one of these, or it's October 5th was yesterday, this does tend to be our highest enrollment for the year. Grades K through 9, we really don't see a lot of change throughout the school year. 10, up and down a couple kids, usually year to year it's pretty consistent. It's just 11th and 12th grade where we tend to see just a decrease throughout the year. And so as we see a cohort change, what this reflects is our spring enrollment. So I think we went back to the June 1st. And what that looks like as of October 1st this year. So you can see the kindergarten where we were at 480, we are at 473 this year. So this is where you'll see those numbers as we look at them with those previous grades as well compared to projections. This is what actually happened as kids rolled forward. Obviously within these numbers, some students have left and some have started with us. So with that, again, though, it's not unusual to see a similar trend though to what we saw to our projections, because we do project for this as well.
So I was just we mentioned to you that we've seen a slight decline with this enrollment, and that's what we've seen. Kindergarten is down a little bit. If you think back to the schools, North Point, Centerview stayed relatively similar. Woodcrest and Park Terrace's biggest drop where they saw was at kindergarten. Woodcrest was saw one, but some of the other grades more concerns around the Spanish version of this environment. But we're having meetings with all of the KMSD metro area superintendents each week, and this is at both kindergarten and our kindergarten drop ended up not being as significant as we thought. It's only 13 students. We were concerned it was going to be more like 50 just a few weeks ago. So that's good news. In our drop overall, the rest is not There's some that are similar to us, but, so despite the fact that we're seeing a decline there, I am considering ourselves fortunate with it not being more significant than it is. We're having a meeting Friday morning with the superintendents again, we're all going to be looking at this kindergarten drop and maybe looking at what that means for this year, but then what does it really mean for next year for some districts, because then there's space issues in the fall.
You know, it's probably too early to tell, but do we expect to bounce back next year?
With the kindergarten, I would expect that we would if the environment has changed.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, who knows, there's some parents I've talked to who said, yep, we did made this choice for a year because we wanted to be able to take advantage 5 days a week. We're planning to come back, but who knows what happens as the year goes on. Kindergarten, we are expecting to see that 13 come back up. That's where I was actually more concerned when it looked like maybe 40 or 50, because then there was really that concern around space issues. If we had a kindergarten class that was significantly more than normal years, but it's not as drastically different to be kindergarten for us compared to what a lot of schools are seeing. So first, yeah, we would expect to see some of that falls back next year.
And looking back, we must have had some parents that decided in the end to send their kindergarten students, because we saw 30 additional kindergarten students enroll in just those last 5 weeks before school started, so. So as a cohort change, usually we do see, the cohort changes overall as a district don't tend to be a high positive amount, even though we project for enrollment to go up each year. Some of that is because a smaller graduating class of seniors, we have a larger incoming kindergarten class, and this doesn't reflect that trend that we also see. So just as a quick K-12 summary, what this does reflect, both the budget and the ADMs and headcounts, are our kindergarten through our transitions program. So through 12th grade, our 12th grade does include our transition students. We currently have 18 of those. So they're considered 12th graders by the Department of Ed. So it does not include our voluntary pre-kindergarten or our early childhood counts. Right now, this is just the K-12 look. And so with that, it shows what what the board approved for average daily membership for the year. That's how our revenue is generated. Back in June, how that looks as of right now in October, and then the October head count. So that is the actual number of students that are coming through our door, and does reflect those students that are maybe part-time PSEO and part-time at our high school. So those students would be reflected if they were half and half as a 0.5 ADM, but a 1.0 on head count. So that's where those two numbers differentiate. If you're looking head count by school, and we didn't get into that level of detail, what you would also see is potentially a 9th grader that's at Lighthouse and at the high school, because they take classes both within Lighthouse, and then they might go over for an AP physics class at the high school. So as a head count, they would actually be listed in both. We've removed those, so it's still only showing up as one student, but each individual schools would have left as though they each have that student full time. So with that, a demographic update. The percentage of our students that are eligible for free or reduced meals, currently we're projecting 37%. It's not, if you pulled a report today, where it sits, but we are still working on making sure all of our direct certifications from the county have been uploaded and are in, as well as really making sure we're making that effort to get out and reach all of our families. The great advantage of the summer meal program is that all kids are eating for free. The disadvantage of that is really trying to make sure we can encourage them to still apply for free and reduced meals, because so much of our compensatory and title funding depends on those numbers. And so we have been reaching out, and we are getting people to apply. So now it's making sure that we're reaching those new families, especially we've had a lot of the returning families reapply. It's getting to those new families as well. 46% of our students are non-white. This is an increase of 1% over the 2019-20 school year. And then also our non-resident open enrollment students is also up to 23%, and that's also an increase of 1%. That was not a surprise to see that again this year, as we've heard a lot of families who have heard that Spring Lake Park is doing such a great job with the hybrid and the online learning. It was not a surprise to continue to see that. A lot of that open enrollment is actually at the high school level. I think we have done such a good job with that word has spread. So that is just a quick summary that while our overall enrollment is slightly under what we projected during the budget process last year, with this ongoing pandemic, while it is lower, it's not what we budgeted for, it's not a surprise. when we did the budget in June, we let the board know that we knew we were being less conservative than we maybe would have been had we not had the fund balance that we have. And then that leads into this next one. We wanted to make sure we were still staffing our sites. So when we do the budget, from a revenue standpoint, we were more conservative. When we did the staffing within our sites, we were less conservative. And that's a trend we started several years ago to make sure that we had the right staffing up front, knowing that we wanted those in place and we weren't trying to rush to hire at the last minute. So that is something that we did continue through this. We did know that with the fund balance, we had the ability to absorb a lower enrollment if that is what happened. With the additional staff that we have hired this year due to the combination of hybrid learning and extended flexible learning, we have used those federal grant dollars to cover those expenses, and we've talked about about that last week. Staffing is actually continuing to be reviewed weekly. There's a group of people that gathers every Wednesday to make sure that we're doing that. And in addition to that, every week we do continue to monitor enrollment as well. And that's something that we have been doing for many years. Each week we do a poll, we compare it, and then that helps us year to year to say, okay, this is what we would expect to see between October and May. So we look at those each year as well, and we will continue to track that. So that is what we have for the enrollment update. If there are any questions.
Any questions?
I do. Has our free and reduced, we're at 37%, do we know what that was last year?
It was 37%
Okay,
last
so,
year.
okay.
Yeah, right now our actual counts and percentages that are in are lower, but we're working on making sure, you typically look lower at this point of the year as we
Sure.
continue to get them in, and we have a few more weeks to make sure we have everybody's in order to count.
And then the current free breakfast and lunch program runs through the end of the year, December,
Yes,
unless the funds run out.
unless
sooner.
the funds
Okay.
run out, yeah.
Okay.
And that's great for the families. One of the challenges we have that is still making sure that the families apply.
Right.
Free and reduced lunch, because there's other resources that we receive as a district as a result of those free and reduced lunch counts, and we also want them having that benefit after December 31st. So that's been one of the pieces of outreach that we need to do to make sure that families understand the importance of completing that application.
Yeah, we've been handing out applications at times during the meal distribution. They were handed out over the summer. Communications is communicated in those. So we're trying to reach families, and then at this point of the year is where we're really, it's phone calls and making sure that the pick crews at the sites are also getting involved to make sure we're reaching out to those families, especially the ones that we know haven't reapplied, or that the sites know the family may need help.
Are we seeing a difference in distant learners that are applying for free and reduced?
I did not look at it as far as the percentage that are in each learning model.
Okay. I'm just curious, because most of them may not see the benefit of applying for it if their students are staying, if their kids are staying at home.
Right.
So I was just kind of curious.
And usually we get a big uptick when sports registrations
Yeah.
happen,
Oh, sure.
or, anything else where there's a theater, any of that, because there's a reduced sliding skill fee for those as well. So it's usually when we see the uptick, so we really try to reach the families before those happen, so that we've made the deadlines that we're required to make by the occur.
Other questions? Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On to superintendent's report.
Okay, real briefly, I just wanted to update the board. Left you a voicemail on this last week, but back in August, when we had long presentations with you about recommendations for the year, how we'd open, and a recommendation to open with modified campus or hybrid model in our schools, it was at that time that the state had introduced this 14-day case rate for 10,000 people within an Anoka County. And if your case rate is at the number 20, that requires you, K-12, to implement that modified campus or hybrid model. At that time, when we made that recommendation, our number was at 19.1. And we anticipated that, at some point here in the near future, it would likely hit 20. And what we didn't want to do is announce one model and then just a few weeks into school, or maybe not even getting to the start of school, have to change to a hybrid model if we were planning something else. We wanted some consistency. That model went from 19.1 to 19.9, kind of Thursday did go over 20. In forecasting the next couple of weeks, we anticipate to continue seeing that increase, at least up into the mid-20s. The next key kind of decision point is 30. And at 30, it would require grades 7, 12 to go distance learning. Right now, we're prepared to be able to make that transition if we need to. Continue just to try to do all we can to make the model that we are in successful. So that's what we're working on now, and we'll continue with that. And Thursday, there will be a message I'll be getting out to all our families, kind of just giving them an overview of the process, and we'll just keep communicating with them as the year goes on. One point that I've had a number of questions on, so that you can just clarify if you get that question, is K-1, we have all of our students. We've got our students coming each and every day for our kindergarten and first grade students, but we're implementing the health and safety guidelines of the hybrid model. So even though our number has gone above 20, we will continue bringing our kindergarten and first grade students to school each day. They're in class size 15 or less, using all those guidelines, so we will continue with that. So we'll keep monitoring this, not just on a weekly basis, on almost a daily basis as we look at this, and we'll do all we can to keep our families informed in plenty of time to feel the need for a transition. So, and let's hope that there's not that need for a transition, except for maybe being able to come back more in person down the road. So I would anticipate most likely through the end of the first trimester that we'll put this model if possible. So that's the only thing I really wanted to provide an update on.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Go to action items. American Education Week, November 16th through the 20th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Strobel, seconded by Forsberg. To adopt the following resolution. Whereas American Education Week was first observed in December 1921 as an opportunity to focus public support on our nation's schools. And whereas the strength of our nation depends on a citizenry that values our public schools and supports our children's education. And whereas all staff in the district provide a safe, healthy, and nourishing learning environment for our children and communities. And whereas schools bring together adults and children, educators and volunteers, business leaders, and elected officials in a common enterprise. Whereas in the year 2020, during an ongoing global pandemic, the education of society's doctors, scientists, and trailblazers feel more urgent and relevant than ever. Now therefore be it resolved, the school board of Spring Lake Park Schools hereby designates November 16th through the 20th, 2020, as the recognition and celebration of American Education Week in Spring Lake Park. Any discussion?
I just quickly comment, because some of the board members may be wondering, in normal years, we get around and feed staff and provide some treats to them to honor them and the work that they've done. This is still over a month away, so we will see what the world presents as options for us at that time, but we're looking into that, and we'll keep you up to date as we go along.
My only comment is I can't thank our educators and those involved, from fellow board members, superintendent, down to volunteers. During the past year, I just cannot extend enough thank you for the time and dedication to our kiddos. Thank you. Clerk, would you make a call? Roll call?
Ms. Bo?
Yes.
Mr. Kroon?
Yes.
Ms. Forsberg?
Yes.
Ms. Wheaton, yes. Mr. Strobel?
Yes.
Mr. Easter?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We'll move on to acknowledgement of gifts. Make it a motion
So moved.
by Forsberg, second
Second.
by Wheaton, to approve the following resolution. Whereas school board policy 706 establishes guidelines for the acceptance of gifts to the district, and whereas Minnesota statute 465.03 states that a school board may accept a gift of real or personal property by the adoption of a resolution approved by 2/3 of its members. Therefore, be it resolved that The school board is from the Park School accepts with appreciation the gifts as presented at the meeting. And thank you for the gifts.
Yes, thank you.
Definitely appreciate it. Any other comments? Discussion? Clerk, can you call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Bo?
Yes.
Mr. Crown?
Yes.
Ms. Forsberg?
Yes.
Ms. Wheaton? Yes. Mr. Strobel?
Yes?
Mr. Easter?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, on to board forum. Anything from the board? John?
Had a couple things. With the AMSC board meeting last Friday, where a couple professors from the university were presented with the Friends of Education Award, who've done a lot of work with school districts among the state, helping craft policy and help with school districts, so that was good. And the other part of that meeting was an overview of the school finance working group. It was presented by Dr. Melcher, Tom Melcher, who's been a finance guru in the state of Minnesota for 25 years or something like that. A lot of details, a lot of work that was done by this group related to school finance reform, with a very high price tag along with it, but I think there's aspects of it that may make sense going forward. There's a lot of detail out on the AMSC website. The presentation's out there. There's even some runs that you can look at some of the costing and stuff, how it affects our district and stuff. So just want to bring that up. The other thing I did was I attended a virtual town hall on the proposed constitutional amendment related to changing the language of education. That was this afternoon with former Chief Justice Alan Page and President of the Federal Reserve, Neil Kashkari. Basically, this had kind of been quiet for a while after the pandemic came about. Prior to that, there was a lot of activity, and then it kind of got quiet. It sounds like there's a momentum rebuilding on that to try and push that into the upcoming legislature to eventually bring it to a vote to the public at an election sometime down the road here. Nothing's really changed. There's a lot of questions about some of the language in the proposed amendment that they were trying to answer. I don't think we've seen too much change in what they presented from 6 months ago. So just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Amy?
Okay, we'll let Marilyn finish it up.
Okay.
I had the Panther Foundation meeting, and I just wanted to share this with you guys because I just thought, this number just astounds me. As of September 21st, when the meeting was, the Panther Foundation has funded 12,100 weekend packs since the beginning of the pandemic. So I just think that they deserve a huge shout out for that. And then I also virtually attended the Woodcrest Spanish Immersion PTO meeting, and that is just a great group of men and women. They're kind of rethinking everything, how they're planning for a lot of things. They're focusing on the spring to do a lot of in-person things. They're trying to rethink or reimagine their fundraising options, but just a hardworking group of people, so it was fun to sit in and kind of watch their hard work.
Thank you. Carol?
It's interesting because I was at the AMSC meeting via Zoom. And that working group, and then the proposed amendment, and then there's Reimagine Minnesota. And it seems like at some point in time, all of those things should fall together. So there's a lot of things out there now to try to improve education, and particularly in light of funding. Just an observation. Tomorrow evening is the 9/16 board meeting. At the last meeting, the superintendent submitted her letter of retirement to be effective at the end of June. And tomorrow night, it would be nice if it was an in-person meeting, because I could stand in the doorway and not let anybody go until a decision has been made as to how we will proceed to select a new superintendent, but it needs to be done by Zoom, and well, those who leave early will just be out of luck and have to put up with the decisions of the rest of us. But as of tomorrow night, there will be a decision on how we will proceed to hire that individual.
Just gonna say good luck seeing it from the door.
Well, you know, some of these things can be talked about endlessly, and
Sure.
we just absolutely must have a decision.
Right. Any board members on this? Michael? Okay. All right. We will move to adjournment. Motion to move to adjournment?
Hello.
Motion by Wheaton, second? Second. By Strobel, to adjourn the meeting. Meeting is adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor, so you say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, meeting is adjourned. At 8:22.
Good job, Tony.